Hello, it's David Pullman for the Whole Note Studio. It's Saturday the 15th of October 2011 and I'm here with Christina Petrowska Quilico. And I saw you just yesterday, actually. You were at well, I don't need to tell you where you were, you know, but for our viewers, at Gallery 345 for an Ann Southam tribute concert that was presented by Array Music, who've been one of the champions of her work, right, in the last while.
Well, I remember Array. I think I first played with Array many, many years ago, 1989, and Christos Hatsis was involved, and we went on a tour of Greece twice. I think 91 was the last tour. I don't have the dates, and I'd have to look them up, but it was exciting. We did a program of Canadian music, and that was one of the first times I introduced Ann's music in Greece, and Christos Hatsis music, and we also did a whole program of Greek music. So I remember at the very end of our rehearsals, the Greek pianist was to premiere a concerto by George Koumendakis, a student of Pierre Boulez, canceled out, so I had to do it. I just remember practicing 10 hours a day to learn this concerto.
How long did you have for that?
Less than 3 weeks. Wow. Yeah, it was a
and
really
you have
tough
to get
piece.
it into the fingers.
You do, and I was doing other repertoire. I know something by Michael Travlos, a Greek composer. Anyway, it was really interesting. The concerts for the Greek music were really well attended, and they were in an open-air theater. The Canadians were less well attended, but you know, musicians who were interested were there. So that was the first time I played with Array a long time
was
ago.
that when Henry Krzyzarczyk was the artistic director?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. And so your connection with Ann Southam's music goes back a long time, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. About 30 years ago.
Really?
And I remember very well because Ruth Kasdan was studying some piano with me at the time. I was teaching at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. And she brought me a piece by Ann Southam, and she said, oh, can you help me with it? So I helped her. And then she said, oh, I think you should play all of these rivers. She's looking for someone to play them. And at that time, I was maybe 8 months pregnant with one of my children. So I thought, okay, I'm not doing much else. I'll take a look. And her tempos were really slow, even for the fast ones. They weren't fast then.
Right.
And it took like hours to get through the repertoire. So I thought, oh, I'm going to do something. And I called her up and I said, oh, can you please come over, and you have to sit down and, you know, don't be upset, but I've changed your music a little bit. And her reaction was great. And I figured, oh, she's not going to yell at a pregnant woman. She's nice, so I'm okay. And she really loved it. And we started up a really good friendship from then on. And I think everybody has a different relationship with composers, you know, according to their unique perspectives and their particular gifts. So I found Ann extremely accommodating, and we worked very well together. And one of my favorite stories, I've told it many times, when I was recording Rivers, she'd come to the house and she was changing endings and would call me, and on the phone we'd sit at the piano, try to figure out an ending. But she came to the house and put her manuscript on the carpet and was sitting on the floor. And I had 4 dogs, I think, at that time, one a little puppy, who escaped and saw the manuscript and thought, wee pad.
Right, rivers and rivulets.
That's
on the same
absolutely, just ran to the manuscript in front of my horrified reaction, and poor Ann, and just peed all over the Rivers score. And Ann was just great. She picked up the score. I was helping her, you know, dripping Rivers, and ran to the bathroom. And she said, "I hope that's not a comment on my music." I love that. Yeah, she had
dog-ass critic.
Yes. And the other thing was that was so much fun with her. Every time I play Rivers, she'd say, "It gets faster," you know, for the
all
fast
the time.
ones.
Well, so do Rivers from time to time.
Yes, they do.
It's interesting. The tempo was very fast last night.
Yeah.
It seemed that.
Well, for the fast ones, the slow ones can be slow. For me, it depends on the piano and
on
the
the
room.
actual the instrument itself.
The action of the piano. Because if you've got a stubborn piano, you can't play it that fast because it won't react. So if I've got a fast piano, it's like, you know, driving a fast car. Yeah, a sports car, here I go. So Ann was always saying, each time she heard it, well, I like that one best. You know, too bad we didn't record that one. And I said, Ann, this is going to be going on forever. Like, each performance is different. And, you know, as long as you keep enjoying them, then that's fine.
And the really complex overtones must also all be different on different pianos as well.
And what I find, what keeps me playing this kind of music, or any music, is the adventure of it. I like to change it sometimes. And I tell my students this, you know, if I've told them something, I say, it's not written in stone. Surprise me if you feel that you want to. That's more exciting than just memorizing everything I say. And when I was a student, that was one of the things I learned from my teacher. I tried to do what she said, Rosina Levine, or
this was when you were in New York,
yes,
right?
at Juilliard, or Oren Freundlich, who I studied with, or the assistant Janine Dowes. They would tell me what to do, and I'd be very careful to work at it. But sometimes at the concert, you know, all you want to do is just sit there and play, and whatever happens. So I hoped that she wouldn't be there, because I had different plans for an interpretation. I don't know, I think it was 14 or 15, and then she came over and she said, well, that's brilliant. And I thought she wasn't there, and I was so upset when I saw her. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry I didn't do what you said. And she said, oh, I loved it much better. And that gave me the freedom, and I've taken that to contemporary music, because that makes it more interesting. Well,
I imagine for some contemporary composers, you don't ever hear the music until somebody plays it.
That's right.
I mean, hear it fully. You may have it note for note, although even that is sometimes not the case. But it is a music of discovery.
It is, but also for the composers. And one thing that I feel really regretful for young composers and also young pianists, there's not that much opportunity to play with orchestra.
It's true, isn't it?
So I think I was very lucky, very fortunate that I started playing with orchestra at a young age. I played the Haydn in Toronto when I was about 10. And when I went, with Ettore Mazzolini.
As they say.
Well, yeah, but I never thought of myself like that. I didn't even tell my friends at school, because it wasn't cool, right? And my brothers, well, the brother that was living at home at the time certainly didn't encourage any of that, and my father didn't really want me in music. So this was just something that I did and didn't feel particularly special about. Now when I look back, I think prodigy, and I'm so grateful that nobody took me seriously.
Nobody actually pigeonholed you as that.
And then, you know, I did win Kiwanis and all this kind of stuff. And then when I went to New York, to the Juilliard School, I was 14, and Boris Berlin encouraged me, and my father said absolutely not, because I was very good at school, and, you know, they anticipated an academic career. And I went to Juilliard, and I got the scholarship, so I went there, and then I won the concerto competition there with Murray Pariah, who was just wonderful. I loved him, a great guy. And he did Beethoven second piano concerto. I did Mozart K488 in Town Hall with orchestra, and got my first New York Times review.
Wow.
And I played with Juilliard Orchestra. I got to do like Chopin E minor 6 times with 6 different conductors, which was just invaluable. And I went to the high school performing arts, so I was playing in the orchestra whenever anybody was absent. I had to play their part, or, you know, learn figure bass and did all that kind of stuff. So I got used to it, accompanying right away. So I played with all different instruments. And living in the States, I went to music camps. I went to Blue Hill, Maine to work with Archer Balsam, Tanglewood, Aspen all summer. I would go to Paris, France, and I would go as artist in residence and accompany everybody, as well as play solo. So that was an invaluable experience. And then at the same time, in my teens, I ended up playing with orchestra. That's what I said, opportunities. I did like the Prokofiev first, second, and third piano concertos. I did the Strauss Burlesque. I've done Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue. I've done The Emperor, lots of Mozarts.
So in terms of, we were talking earlier about it takes time for the music to get back from the memory to the fingers.
Yes.
Do you keep a number of concerti in rep, or how long does it? I mean, for example, what's it? November 4th. You're doing
I'm doing the Grieg.
You're doing the Grieg with the Kindred Spirits
Yes.
Orchestra up at Markham
Yeah.
Theatre, where they're making a real effort to bring in a much stronger classical component in that venue.
Yes.
And it's a nice one, so it'll be interesting. But my question
Yeah.
has to do with does it take time to dust something like that off and get it back to the fingers, or
Not
is
too
not,
much
not
time.
Too much, yeah?
And I credit the Juilliard training because, you know, many times they'd say, well, if somebody's sick, or, you know, can you do this concerto in 5 weeks? I remember Boris Brott, I was scheduled to do Chopin E minor, and then he said, I don't want to do it. I want to do Strauss Burlesque. What? I don't know it. And he said, we got 5 weeks. And I went to Rosina Levy and I said, could you call the conductor up and tell him, you know, not to do it? And she said, no, just learn it.
You've got 5 weeks.
So I did that, pardon me, for the Strauss Burlesque, the Prokofiev first. So it doesn't take me too long to learn, but it has to be focused practice, and you have to know how to practice.
So between Grieg and Southam,
yeah.
there's a bit of an arc, but I imagine there are also certain connections or things that.
Oh, I can address that. Southam, to me, the fast virtuosic pieces have similarity to Franz Liszt, Chopin, bit of Schumann. It's the technical aspects of them. I mean, she did know classical piano, so we're talking about a pianist. Somebody was more comfortable with the piano.
Right.
I don't think she envisioned them
at
quite
Banff
that fast.
in the 80s, mostly, right?
But the technique that's required to play that kind of fast fingers without a break, if you don't have a certain type of technique, if you at a certain point in your life haven't been doing a lot of etudes and
the classical chops for it,
you can
right?
break down, or you can hurt your fingers and develop tendinitis, because it's a lot of fast music for a long time. I recorded Glass Houses, did them in March, and that's over an hour of just fast, fast, fast from beginning to end. The Rivers, at least I've alternated them fast, slow, so I get a break. But anything like the Glass Houses, to do a bunch of them, you really need to have the stamina and kind of the focus. And I think that comes from doing the etudes, like Liszt Transcendental Etudes, which I started when I was at Juilliard, you know, young.
And that's
Chopin
with her
etudes.
faster music. There's that connection, and then so the Grieg is
more
more
like
like
what? So the Grieg is
what?
like that,
It's
because
more-
it's virtuosic repertoire. So the hands go into those patterns quite easily. I mean, I did the Franz Liszt album this year, and I felt it launched the same time as Glass Houses, and everybody was saying, what, Liszt and Southam? And I said, oh, no, same fast technique. And,
Interesting.
and then the Liszt has those late slow pieces, so I thought it was quite comparable.
Interesting.
Yeah, she would have loved it.
I found myself wondering for a moment while you were playing last night. I found myself wondering, was Anne left-handed herself, individually?
I don't think so.
Because it was so interesting watching the piece. I mean, in a way it's for left hand and right hand, but even more strongly, those pieces seem to be for overhand and underhand, because the left hand is almost always in some kind of a crossover, or not even so much a crossover as a straddle relationship to the right hand.
Well, I don't think she was left-handed, but they are difficult. I was showing you in the score, because that type of thing, you know, getting in and out, was over the black keys.
I see.
So I remember when I started them, I thought, well, never mind what I thought. I was, really tricky.
So the left hand is anchored very strongly in the black keys,
yes,
then in those.
and many of the passages. So you're jumping all over the black keys, which reminds me of the black key etude of Chopin, right? So any of those types of etudes, that's what it came to my mind when I was working on them. But yeah, with the concerti like the Grieg, I'm happy that I had a good, solid background on classical piano concerti, because when I am doing the contemporary concerti, and I've recorded 10 of them, 10 Canadian piano concerti, and one more CD will come out of them. And I've done maybe 16 premieres, along with European, international composers. I feel comfortable, and it has a lot to do with rhythm and counting. And I tell my students it's really different playing with orchestra. First of all, the sound. So you have to be very solid with your own part, and you have to make sure you've got a good sense of rhythm. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart. Because even though there's the conductor there, I mean, you're working together. You want to show him how you feel as well.
Do you encourage people to know, do you yourself work at knowing not just your part but the score as a whole? Because I would imagine looking at something that is piano is relative to what the orchestra is doing. You can't arbitrarily come up and say, well, this is going to be pianissimo, this is going to be fortissimo, because it's in relation to an external animal that has its own tempi and all the rest.
And each concerto is a bit different. I remember doing the Alexina Louis the first time I did it at the National Arts Center Orchestra, and she had a Chinese gong kind of behind the piano, and I remember they sounded the gong like this, so they had to move the piano away from the gong because couldn't hear myself come in, couldn't hear anything.
Interesting.
But that was one of the first lessons, and my students have a hard time understanding it, but you made an excellent point, because I went through the same thing. When you're in the studio and you're playing, it's so nice and clean, and I don't want to muddy it with too much pedal. I remember my teacher and Rosina Levine also, when I was doing Rachmaninoff third piano concerto, I had it all nice and clean, and she said, "Who cares?" She said, you want the resonance, you want the harmonies. And so when I was doing the Strauss Burlesque, there was a passage, like 2 pages with nothing but octaves, and I had them nice and clean, was so proud of myself. And Janine said, "No, you got to put the pedal down for the 2 pages." And I said, "Oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. That's going to sound dreadful." She said, "You're not going to hear yourself, and nobody's going to hear you anyway with a Strauss orchestra behind you. Are you kidding?"
Right.
So the first rehearsal, that's exactly what happened. I found myself putting the pedal down and just creating a shape, the energy.
A continuo to the thing almost. Interesting.
And Rosina Levine, when she was talking about the Rachmaninoff third, she said, "You know what?" She said, "Nobody really cares. And nobody can hear if you've gotten all the left-hand notes perfectly. What they want is that direction, like an electrical current from the beginning to the end of the piece. You follow the line, and if it goes into the orchestra, you have to just continue that. So it's from the orchestra to yourself, and it's wonderful. If you can get into that, it's very exciting. I love playing with orchestra. Just a real high.
You play with orchestra and you play solo recital, but chamber has never been a part, or has been a part?
It's been the biggest part of my life.
Has it really?
Well, because once I started, especially at Juilliard, I accompanied all the violin students, or not all of them, but a lot of the violin students of Ivan Galamian, then as assistants. We had to, at Juilliard, that was part. I did a cello, I did tours with flutists. We went all over Europe and the States. When I studied at Aspen, that was chamber music and solo. When I went to Blue Hill, Maine, that was chamber music. Tanglewood, it was chamber music for me. High school performing arts, I accompanied all sorts of instruments. When I went to Paris many summers as artist in residence, I accompanied. That was part of my commitment, was to accompany all the different instrumentalists. I can't tell you. I mean, that's all I've done. But
piano plus one mostly, not piano trio?
No, trios, quintets. When I was in Ottawa, living in Ottawa, they had music for Sunday afternoon, and they were chamber groups from the orchestra, and I used to accompany a lot of those. And they'd get somebody from different orchestras in the States to come and coach us, so that there were sextets, quintets, and trios. And then, of course, I worked with individuals. So, like at York, we've done a whole bunch of cello and all the Beethoven sonatas. Jacques Israel.
You're working with Jacques.
Yeah, we're working together as a duo. So we did, a number of concerts together, and so I keep doing that all the time.
And in terms of modern repertoire?
Well, Jacques and I are doing an all-Canadian program this year.
Oh, yeah.
So getting away from the Brahms and Beethoven for a bit. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about the upcoming CD. It's called Tapestry?
Tapestries. Yeah.
Tapestries.
Yeah.
And it's being launched at an event at the Canadian Music Centre beginning of November?
November 2nd.
November 2nd, with a little concert to...
Well, we're trying to decide, because it's difficult. They've got the Weinswag piano, the upright.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's anything can be played. We're still thinking about it. But yeah, it's a different CD, because the last CD I did of Concerti for them were Canadian women, Alexina Louis, Violet Archer, and Larissa Kuzmenko. And that was a Juno nomination for that. And I had a Juno nomination for a Glenn Buhr piano concerto that I did with the Winnipeg Symphony. So this Tapestries had Heather Schmidt's piano concerto, number 2, that she wrote for me. And I did the world premiere with Kitchener-Waterloo. And it just didn't fit on the first, and Center Discs didn't want to do 2 CD set, because I keep doing so many 2 CD sets.
Yeah, right.
So they said, okay, enough, just 1 CD. So we left poor Heather off, and David Yeager was very fond of that piano concerto. And somehow we got into a conversation about different types of piano concerto, and he said, well, there's nothing ever written for piano and like choir or anything like this. I said, you just reminded me. I did a piece, and CBC recorded it by George Fiala with the Ukrainian-Canadian opera chorus and chimes.
Okay.
And I said, I don't remember it at all. So he said, I'll look it up. And he looked it up and sent me a copy, and he said, I really like it. It sounds really neat. And so I listened to it, and I thought, wow, this is really different. And we decided maybe it's not a bad idea to put it out there.
So it's Heather and George Fiala. And those are the 2?
Yeah, those are the 2, yeah. That's
Heather, I find myself thinking, Heather's interesting because the last time I heard her was actually a recital that she did for Music Toronto probably 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And the program included a couple of her own works, but it also included Clara Schumann and Fanny Mendelssohn.
That's right.
I think those were the other, as well as I think a real fireworks Rachmaninoff thrown in. So she seems to be in a continuum of. I mean, it's interesting because she's both a performer and a composer, and I've found myself wondering. Is she one of the people, you must have crossed paths repeatedly with her. Did you meet her through Anne, or did you know her independently?
I knew her independently. Actually, I was giving a recital in New York, Franz Liszt and Canadian women composers, but we called it Liszt and Women.
Oh, there's a good one.
Yeah, intriguing.
Absolutely.
And used her soloist, and she was in New York at the time, so we worked together. And I recorded it on Northern Sirens, which she really liked. And then the CBC commissioned that concerto, so yeah, we've known each other over the years. Yeah, and she's now moved to California. So I don't see her.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she got married again, and she's there. But she's a certain kind of composer, and that's why I felt that matched Fiala, because the Fiala concerto, I mean, to me it sounds very Brahmsian, very Rachmaninoff. It's a certain type of very large writing. It's Ann Southam, for example, is more like the French style. It's more delicate, it's fast, Ravel like even, but the Fiala's Brahms, the big
very
stuff.
Broad strokes.
Yeah, very broad and passionate, and I felt that her concerto, I mean, she is a pianist, so it's very virtuosic, and that's who she is. She doesn't apologize for the way she writes, and so it just seemed that they were two virtuosic works from very different generations and from very different places, because Heather's from Calgary originally, and George Fiala's from Kiev, and he studied at all the famous places in Russia and the Ukraine. So just the nature, although they don't seem like they would make a good match, it's interesting to have them together, and different perspectives. And so if you're looking for something like really new music, it's not going to be on that CD. I've played those types of concertos. I did Claudio Ambrosini from Italy in Montreal, and that's really hardcore avant-garde. I had to wear gloves with the fingers cut off, and that's very very difficult. So I've made it my life's mission to keep my feet in both camps, so to speak, because I had the Juilliard training, and then I also, and Levine knew about it, I went to Darmstadt and I was in Stockhausen's class, and I worked with Boulez and Ligeti, and my first husband was a composer, he passed away young, Michel-Georges Bréjean, and he was writing very hardcore visual graphic music at the time. So I just, like Jekyll and Hyde, put on my different hats to play, and I think I like it.
The balance is important.
Yes, because I think that if you're just doing the hardcore, it's not. I don't know.
The hardcore which?
Avant-garde.
Avant-garde.
Yeah, I mean, like if I do Zhevsky, Winsboro, Cotton Mill Blues, it's really heavy hitting, or some of the American. I like to go home and play some Beethoven or Brahms. I mean, I need that in my life. I need the both. And then, of course, my late husband, Louis Quilico, I toured with him. Everybody, I had to take some time off from new music to do that.
Absolutely,
but it was an invaluable experience. We worked really well together, and what a nice way to do opera.
Absolutely. So in recital,
we did, and I did the paraphrases to give him a break if we did recitals.
Right.
So that worked out. But just to be in the company of the great singers, and I was on sabbatical, so I got to travel with them and stay at the Met and watch all that. So a very different life than.
So do you think working in what you call the hardcore in new music actually makes you more receptive to the moments of surprise in the classical repertoire, where one can fall so easily into patterns of this is the way it should be done?
Yeah.
Do you hear differently?
I do. I think they work, one helps the other. Tonal quality, for example. You've got contemporary music that, if you play it with a harsh tone, the piece might fail, but if you play it with a beautiful tone, it might work. On the other hand, you can reverse that sometimes if you're doing, classical music and you want to have a little bit more character, and you want to have a little harder edge. Having just done Xenakis, for example, it helps with that. And
you've got the tools.
Yes, and music's music to me. Whatever it is, I like it. It's adventuresome, and I like a challenge. And you don't get bored. I'm not bored with my music. I'm still playing. Everybody asks me, my God, you're, I've been playing for a long time, and yet I still want to continue. I get a new piece of music. I'm excited by it. I want to present it. I want to do it. I like playing concerts, and it's just really wonderful. And each time I play, something new happens. It's never quite the same. Even you put it on CD, and but a couple of years later you play it a bit differently. Oh, darn it, why can't I record it again?
Right.
But you have to be able to let it go.
Because it is in its own time.
Yeah, and you just have to go ahead and either repeat it or go do something else. So for me it seems to work, and I think the technique of both help. The only difference is that with contemporary music you use your music, and then with classical you have to memorize it.
I wanted to ask you a bit about memorizing, because it's interesting. We was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago who talked about the fact that the requirement for the memorized concerto actually came to the music quite late, that it was show-offs like Liszt who actually forced that on in terms of expectation. Yes. And that it's not necessary. I mean, how do you, what's your take on that?
Well, Clara Schumann was another one. Well, I was doing a lecture on Franz Liszt, so I have my top 10 reasons why Liszt is a modern composer, but he was one of the first that was memorizing entire programs. Mm-hmm. In fact, he gave concerts in Berlin. In 10 weeks, he gave 21 concerts, 80 works. 50 of those were memorized. He had a prodigious memory. He memorized the Beethoven Third Piano Concerto in 48 hours and performed it. He was a great improviser. And at that time, there were these duels with Thalberg, and they had these kind of hexameron variations, and that was part of the pianist's job, to have this tremendous memory. I know that lately a lot of pianists have been discussing that. Is it absolutely necessary if you feel more comfortable with the music? Mm-hmm. I find it a difficult question. I was experimenting now with the Grieg, and I had a grad student accompany me, and I had my music there, and then I tried it without the music. Well, it was much easier without the music.
Without the music.
Although one always worries that you're going to forget it. You know, you just get a little nervous. But
maybe worry is part of the creative apparatus.
Yeah, I think so. And I think people need to remember that even if it happens, we're human. Mm-hmm. You know, and we're not CDs.
Yeah.
You know, and the perfection of these CDs. But in live concerts, you often have pianists forgetting. There are a lot of stories. Stephen Huff on his blog was talking about, you know, the fact that probably we shouldn't play with music. Mm-hmm. And Sviatoslav Richter, after 50, started using his music, and, you know, who cares?
I heard a story that he changed his practice because his own perfect pitch shifted by a semitone, and he was hearing things a semitone different from what he was seeing.
I've heard that too, and that's the downside of perfect pitch. Mm-hmm. Because if you're playing on a piano, I mean, I can tell if it's out of tune, but you know, I get used to it pretty quickly, and it doesn't bother me. But I've known pianists who are really thrown by a piano that may not be exactly what they
matching their own
pitch. Expectations. So it's difficult.
So I think we're going to have to wrap here, but just to go back, the 5th.
The November 5th, the Grieg.
The 2nd is the launch of the CD, and and after that, what's
lots
looming?
Happening. Well, I'm playing the All Canadian with Jacques Israelovich.
Right.
And I totally forgot the date. It's in January. Yeah. I'm doing a Karen Kieser concert because I've recorded the first CD of a 2-CD set by Greek-Canadian composer Konstantin Karavassilis.
Yes.
We received the Harry Friedman Award for this in an Ontario Arts Council grant. So in the summer I did the first CD, and I'm going to record the second of his music. I'm doing Rivers with the Toronto Dance Theatre in April. With a new ballet by Christopher House that he's choreographed. Okay. So I'll be on stage with the dancers, very exciting, and we're doing it in the National Arts Centre as well. And I've got another recording of women composers that I have to record. I've just got lots of projects. Yeah.
More power to the hands.
That's right. Well, I'm very lucky that I have never had tendonitis, and I thank my teachers for that, and I work out, and I don't take myself too seriously. I walk the dogs, I lift weights, I don't worry about it. So I think that's the best attitude.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too.